flight line sat under a dying sun, washed in dull orange and drifting dust. Engines ticked as they cooled. Rotors wound down in uneven rhythms. Pilots, maintainers, and ground controllers clustered around a canvas command tent that glowed from the light inside. Boots crunching against gravel. Radios murmuring in half-finished sentences. Someone inside the tent called out, sound off with call signs. Voices answered back one after another, confident, familiar names that carried weight. Then a quieter voice followed, a female voice. She gave her call sign for half a second. Nothing happened. Then someone let out a short laugh. Another snorted. A voice repeated her call sign, stretching the syllables, twisting it into something playful, mocking. A few more chuckles followed. She stood just outside the tent flap, helmet tucked under one arm. Flight suit faded from countless washes, no custom stitching. No colorful patches, no decorations meant to catch the eye. The fabric creased at the elbows and knees, worn in the way of gear that had been used, not displayed. Her eyes stayed forward. She did not blink. She did not shift her weight. Another airman shook his head. That can't be real. Someone else added. Sounds like something from a video game. Laughter rolled again, louder this time. Around her, conversation continued as if she were invisible. That strange hollow feeling settled in the air. The kind that comes when you are judged before you have spoken a second sentence. When a room decides who you are without ever asking. She felt it, she carried it. She said nothing. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Captain Mara Cole had arrived at the forward operating base 3 weeks earlier. No ceremony, no introduction speech, no handshake to her. One morning, there was simply a new name on the flight roster. By afternoon, she was standing on the flight line like she had always belonged there. Early 30s, lean build, short, dark hair tucked tight beneath her helmet liner. Her face carried a neutral expression most of the time, not cold, not warm, just settled, like someone who had learned long ago that emotions were better spent on things that mattered. On paper, she was listed as a combat pilot assigned temporarily to the Joint Air Tasking Element supporting ground operations across the region. Nothing about the line stood out, no bold remarks, no highlighted achievements, no attached combination summary. When people first glanced at her records, they saw a normal transfer. When they glanced at her in person, they saw even less. She was smaller than most of the pilots, not weak, not fragile, just compact, efficient, unremarkable in a world where size often drew unconscious assumptions. Her flight suit looked like everyone else's, but without the small touches many pilots added over time. No stitched nicknames, no colorful morale patches, no personalized art, no inside jokes sewn into fabric. Her helmet was plain gray, no painted designs, no teeth, no lightning bolts, just a small American flag on the back and a serial number stenkled near the base. She rarely spoke in briefings. When she did, it was short, direct, one sentence at most. While others debated routes and fuel loads and contingency plans with animated voices and hand gestures, Mara sat slightly hunched forward, pen moving steadily across a small notebook. Not a tablet, not a phone, a real notebook. She wrote in neat, compact lines, coordinates, headings, times, wind notes. Nothing flashy, nothing wasted. She always arrived before the first crew chief unlocked the tool cage. Most mornings she stood alone beside her assigned aircraft, walking slow circles around it while the base was still waking up. She ran her fingers along panel seams, paused at rivet lines, looked closely at intake edges. She never rushed, she never cut corners. If a maintainer approached, she nodded. If they spoke, she listened. If they explained a minor issue, she thanked them. No jokes, no complaints, no impatience. When pre-flight checks finished, she climbed down the ladder and stepped aside, letting the ground crew continue without hovering. She trusted their work. They noticed that in the chow tent, she sat at the end of long tables, sometimes alone, sometimes beside people who did not know her name. She ate quietly, methodically. She never lingered. When card games started at night, she walked past them. When laughter broke out around burn barrels, she headed in the opposite direction. Not because she disliked people, not because she thought she was better. She simply did not need noise. More than a few pilots mistook that silence for insecurity. Others read it as arrogance. Most read it as weakness. A junior lieutenant once leaned toward another pilot and whispered, "She looks lost." Another said, "Probably fresh out of training." someone else guessed she had pulled strings for an easy deployment slot. None of them asked her. Mara heard every word. The flight line carried sound. Tents echoed. Metal structures bounced voices farther than people realized. She heard the jokes about her size, the comments about her plane gear, the quiet speculation about her call sign. She heard all of it. Her face never changed. Inside there was no anger, no burning need to correct anyone, just a steady, controlled stillness, the kind built over years. Her hands were always steady, not tense, not clenched, relaxed. Like they were waiting for work. Her posture was loose but balanced, weight evenly distributed, shoulders down, spine straight without stiffness. People who had spent time around combat veterans sometimes noticed it. Most did not. Her eyes moved constantly, not darting, not nervous. Slow sweeps left to right, up to down. She tracked people the way some people track clouds, automatically, unconsciously. If a vehicle backfired, she did not flinch. If a helicopter spooled unexpectedly, she did not jump. She simply glanced toward the sound, processed it, and looked away. Once during a hot afternoon, she reached up to adjust the collar of her flight suit. For less than a second, the inside edge of fabric folded outward. Hidden there, sewn into the lining, was a small faded squadron patch. The colors were dull, the stitching worn thin. Not something anyone would notice unless they were standing close. No one commented. Mara adjusted the collar back into place. The patch disappeared again. She did not come to the space to be known. She did not come to collect admiration. She did not come to build a reputation. She came for the same reason she had always come to fly. To support the people on the ground who depended on voices in their headsets and shapes in the sky. To do a job that did not care who you were when you took off, only what you could do when it mattered. Everything else was noise. And Mara Cole had learned long ago how to live without listening to noise. The briefing room smelled like dry marker ink, sweat trapped in fabric, and stale coffee that had boiled too long. A projector hummed against the far wall, throwing a map across a white screen that flickered whenever the generator coughed. Folding chairs sat in tight rows, and the air felt thick with impatience. Like everyone was trying to outrun something they could not name. The mission planner stood at the front and traced routes with a laser pointer, tapping ridgelines and roads the way a teacher tapped a chalkboard. Voices rose and fell around the room as pilots argued over fuel loads, ingress angles, and the most likely threat corridors. Some of it was routine. Some of it was nerves dressed up as confidence. Mara sat in the second row with her notebook open on her knee. She wrote while others talked. When the planner paused and asked if anyone had concerns about the planned route, Mara lifted her hand once, not high, not theatrical. It was the kind of gesture that would be missed if you were not watching for it. The room shifted a little, like it had to decide whether to acknowledge her. "Yes, Captain," the planner said, voice neutral. Mara glanced up at the projected map. "The valley wind channels through that notch at this time of day," she said. "If we push through there on the inbound, the turbulence will force a wider correction. You'll lose a few seconds and a little fuel. Recommend a slightly higher line over the ridge, then drop." Her voice was calm. Even no apology in it. A couple of pilots looked back at their own kneeboards. One leaned toward another and whispered something with a grin. The planner nodded slowly, but his eyes had already drifted past her, searching for someone louder. "Noted," he said, and moved on. Discussion continued without her. 5 minutes later, a pilot in the back row, Captain Rohr, spoke up with the ease of someone used to being heard. "Hey," he said, pointing at the map. "If we go through that notch, we're going to get tossed around. We should ride higher over the ridge and drop in late." The planner snapped toward him like he had just received new information. "That's a good catch," he said, nodding with approval. "Exactly. That's the kind of thinking we need." A few pilots murmured agreement. Someone tapped their pen as if impressed. Mara lowered her eyes back to the notebook. Her pen did not pause. No one looked at her long enough to notice. After the briefing ended, people filed out into the dusty sunlight, stretching and joking as if the room had been a sports locker instead of a planning cell for lives. Mara stayed seated long enough to finish writing the last line. Then she closed her notebook, tucked it away, and walked out without haste. On the flight line, the joke returned like it had been waiting. A group of pilots stood near a refueling truck, helmets resting on a crate, hands wrapped around water bottles. Their laughter rose and fell in waves. Mara walked past them, her boots steady on the crushed gravel. One of the voices turned toward her loud enough to carry. "Hey, what was it again?" the pilot said, glancing at his friend. "Say your call sign." Mara did not stop. She did not look over. She kept walking. The pilot repeated it anyway, dragging out the syllables, making it sound childish, like a nickname given to embarrass someone in high school. Laughter followed, not cruel enough to be called bullying. Not soft enough to be harmless. The kind of laughter that let everyone participate without anyone taking responsibility. Mara's shoulders stayed level. Her pace stayed the same. She did not offer them the satisfaction of a reaction. In the operations tent that afternoon, radios crackled with intermittent reports from ground units. The air tasking board on the wall had been updated twice already. Names were moved with dry erase markers like chess pieces. Mara stood near the edge, hands behind her back, listening. A junior pilot, barely out of training, stepped closer as if curiosity had finally outweighed the herd instinct. "Captain Cole," he said, not disrespectful, just unsure. "Where'd you train?" It was the kind of question people asked when they wanted to locate you inside a mental map. If you fit their expectations, conversation continued. If you did not, it died. Mara looked at him. "Stateside," she said. "Then advanced training overseas." The junior pilot blinked, waiting for more. Mara gave nothing else. No base names, no stories, no bragging. The tent filled the silence for her with radio chatter and footsteps. The junior pilot nodded awkwardly. "Oh, right, okay." He drifted away, pulled back toward the louder group like a piece of metal returning to a magnet. By evening, the operational stress began to shift from background pressure to something sharper. A report came in about insurgent movement along a known route used by friendly patrols. Another report followed from a different unit. Similar details, different location. It did not look like coincidence. It looked like preparation. Outside, the wind picked up. Not a gentle breeze, a real desert wind that carried grit and forced people to squint. The sky had that bruised color it got before weather turned ugly, clouds smearing the horizon in thick bands. Maintenance crews worked faster. Voices raised over the growing noise. Aircraft covers snapped and flapped. Antennas rattled lightly. Inside the tent, the mission planner's voice tightened. He stopped joking. He stopped smiling. "We've got movement," he said. "Possible contact within the next few hours. If they hit the patrols at night, our window closes fast." Eyes went to the board. Names went to the schedule. Slots were limited, and every pilot knew what that meant. The room became crowded with a different kind of energy, not laughter now. Competition, hunger, fear, dressed up as ambition. Everyone wanted a slot on the upcoming sorties because sorties were where reputations were built. Sorties were where you proved you belonged. Sorties were where, if you did your job, someone on the ground might live to see tomorrow. Mara stood with her notebook open, writing quietly. A pilot near the front leaned over and murmured, "They're really going to put her up." Another replied, "Not if someone smarter takes her slot." A few heads turned toward Mara. Quick glances, then away again. No one challenged her openly. They did not have to. The doubts sat in the room like another piece of equipment, heavy and unavoidable. The mission planner called for volunteers to fill standby close air support coverage. It was not the glamorous slot. It was waiting. It was being ready. It was launching on someone else's chaos with no guarantee of action, and sometimes no recognition if you did everything right. Hands rose immediately for the prime missions. For standby fewer. Mara raised her hand. Quietly, no flourish. Just a simple lift of the arm. A couple of pilots exchanged looks. One smirked as if he had just witnessed a child asked to sit at the adult's table. Another leaned back in his chair and muttered, not even trying to hide it, "Standby is a waste of a slot. You sit in the air, burn fuel, and come home with nothing." There were a few soft chuckles, not as loud as before, not as confident, but still there. Mara did not look at him. She did not defend herself. She did not try to explain that standby was where you went when you cared more about being useful than being seen. She did not say that standby was where you went when you trusted your own skill enough to wait for the worst call to come through. She simply lowered her hand when the planner nodded and wrote the assignment in. The room moved on. Conversation shifted to weapons loads and calm frequencies and weather contingencies. Mara stayed quiet. Her pen moved. Her face remained calm. And if you had watched her closely, you might have noticed the smallest change. Not fear, not anger, just focus. The kind that sharpened when the sky darkened and the ground started calling for help. What would you have done in her place? Would you have tried to win them over with a joke? Would you have defended your call sign, your record, your right to be there? Or would you have done what Miracle did? Stay silent, stay steady, and prepare like the next radio call might carry someone's last breath. The first crack appeared by accident. It happened late afternoon when the heat had settled into that heavy, suffocating layer that made every movement feel slower than it should. The kind of heat that turned metal into something you felt through your boots. Mara sat on an overturned ammo crate beside her aircraft, her notebook open on her knee. She had her logbook resting on top of it. Another pilot walked past, slowed, then stopped when he realized he had dropped his glove near her boots. He bent down, reached for it, and his eyes flicked toward the open page without intention. He froze for half a second, not long enough for Mara to notice, long enough for him to see a column of numbers. Flight hours, not total time. Combat time. The numbers sat far higher than what anyone expected for someone who looked like a recent transfer. Higher than most of the pilots on the line. He straightened up with his glove in hand, glanced at Mara, then looked away. He did not say anything, but he did not smile either. Later, during radio checks, Mara keyed her mic. Check 1, check 2. Her voice came through the net clean, no static, no hesitation. Package 2. This is Cole, reading you 5 by 5. Short controlled, no filler words, no verbal clutter. Some pilots filled space on the radio when they were nervous. Extra syllables, repeated phrases, little laughs. Mara did none of that. She spoke only what needed to be said, nothing more. A veteran J-Tech sat inside the operations tent with his headset on, listening to the checks while scanning a feed on his tablet. He had spent enough years working air to develop instincts he could not explain. When Mara's voice came through his headset, his eyes lifted from the screen. Not sharply, not dramatically, just enough to show something in his brain had registered. He tilted his head slightly, like someone hearing a familiar song from another room. He did not ask who she was. He did not comment. He simply listened. Outside, Mara climbed the ladder to her cockpit to stow her helmet. As she reached up, the cuff of her flight suit rode back a few centimeters. Just enough. On the inside of her forearm, close to the wrist, a thin, pale line ran across her skin. Not fresh, not red, a burned scar, narrow, clean. The kind left by intense heat. The kind you did not get from brushing a hot exhaust pipe once. A crew chief standing nearby noticed it. His eyes flicked to it, then to her face, then away again. He did not ask. Mara slid her sleeve back down. The scar disappeared. In the operations tent that evening, someone called out, "Cole, you're on standby cast tonight." Mara looked up. "Captain Cole," she said, not sharp, not offended, not raised, just corrected. The voice that had called out the name paused for a beat. "Right, Captain Cole." Something shifted after that, not in a way you could point to, not in a way you could measure. The jokes did not stop completely, but they softened. The laughter when it happened felt forced, shorter, less confident. People started watching her instead of laughing at her. Not with admiration, not with trust, with curiosity. Pilots noticed how she ran through her startup checklist without ever looking at it. They noticed how she always knew where she was in the sequence. They noticed how she never asked where a frequency was written. They noticed how she never raised her voice, even when the flight line was loud. They noticed how she stood slightly apart from groups. Not like someone excluded, but like someone who had chosen that distance. No one said she's something special. No one said she's different. But a few people started thinking it. Quietly to themselves, the unease crept in slowly. Not the fear of her. Not yet. The fear of being wrong about her. The kind of feeling that starts small. The kind that makes you replay earlier moments in your head. The laugh, the joke, the smirk, and wonder just a little if you had laughed too soon. Mara felt the shift not because anyone treated her better. They did not. Not because anyone apologized. They did not. She felt it because the air around her felt tighter. More eyes, longer glances, fewer careless words. She did not change how she walked. She did not change how she spoke. She did not change how she worked. She kept writing, kept checking, kept preparing. Whatever story people were starting to build about her in their heads, Mara Cole had no intention of confirming it or denying it. She was not there to be figured out. She was there to be ready. The call came in just after sunset. Not a clean call, not a structured report. A burst of overlapping voices bled through the operations tent, half swallowed by static and wind noise. Contact, taking fire, grid, standby. The map on the projector flickered as someone switched feeds. The calm rhythm of the bass shattered into motion. Chairs scraped. Headsets went on. A dozen people leaned toward radios at once. Outside, engines began to spool. The weather that had been threatening all afternoon finally started to close. Wind howled through the gaps between tents. Dust rolled across the flight line in low sheets. The sky darkened faster than it should have. A friendly patrol had been moving through rough terrain west of the base. They had walked into an ambush. Small arms. Possible machine gun. Unknown numbers. No visual on enemy positions. The first aircraft was already airborne. A second was taxiing. A third crew was strapping in. Inside the tent, voices layered over each other as grids were shouted, repeated, corrected, and shouted again. Mara stood near the edge of the map board, notebook in hand, eyes moving between the projected terrain and the handwritten coordinates being passed over the radio. Grid is 765-321 break 942, negative. I copied 756-321 break 942. Say again, last grid coming in weak. The JTAC at the center of the tent rubbed his forehead and raised his voice. One at a time. One at a time. Mara wrote the numbers as she heard them. She wrote all of them. Not just the final repeat, the first version. The second version. The corrected version. Her pen paused. She looked down, then back up at the map. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Not panic, not surprise, recognition. She flipped back a page in her notebook. Compared the new grid to the patrol's planned route from earlier. The numbers did not line up. Not wrong by miles, wrong by digits. Close enough to feel right. Wrong enough to put aircraft over empty terrain. Mara took a breath. Recommend verifying grid, she said. Her voice did not cut through the tent. It did not demand attention. It simply existed. A senior pilot standing near the projector glanced over his shoulder. Grid is already verified, he said. We don't have time for rechecks. The radio crackled again. Taking fire, moving north. Can't break contact. Mara looked back down. Then up. The northing and easting may be transposed, she said. Still calm, still level. A couple of heads turned. The senior pilot frowned. We've got 2 aircraft already en route. Mara did not argue tone. She did not raise volume. She pointed at the map. If you flip the last 2 digits, it places them along the dry riverbed east of the ridge that matches their original route. The senior pilot shook his head slightly. You're assuming they're still on their route. I'm assuming the grid that puts them on a cliff face is wrong. Mara said, no edge, no sarcasm. Just fact. Silence pressed in for a half second. Not enough for agreement. Enough for discomfort. The JTX stared at the map, stared at Mara, then at his own screen. The senior pilot crossed his arms. We don't have time to chase hypotheticals. Mara did not look at him. She looked at the JTA. Terrain feature west of the corrected grid is a split ridge line with a narrow saddle. The original grid places them in sheer rock. They reported moving north along cover. The words came out evenly like she had rehearsed them. She had not. She had simply seen it. The JTAC hesitated. You could see it in the way his jaw tightened. He had heard confident voices before. He had also heard wrong ones. Mara did not try to sell it. She did not add extra explanation. She did not talk faster. She simply waited. The radial popped again, taking casualties. The JTAC made a decision that would never appear in a citation. Divert Razer 2, he said quietly. Heads snapped toward him. The senior pilot opened his mouth. The JTAC did not look away from the map. Have Razer 2 checked the alternate grid, Razer 2 acknowledged. Mara did not move. She did not react. She wrote the time down in her notebook. Seconds stretched. The tent felt smaller. Everyone listened to Razer 2's feed. Wind hissed through the open flap. Razer 2 approaching alternate grid. Pause. Longer. Pause. Visual on movement. Friendlies into fillade near dry riverbed. Taking fire from Treen. The tent went still. Not dramatic, not explosive, just still. The first aircraft had been circling empty terrain. Razer 2 rolled in on the corrected position. Within moments, the radial filled with different sounds. Short bursts of controlled fire. Calm call-outs. Enemy positions marked. The patrol's voice came back strained but coherent. Air on station. Copy effects were moving. One aircraft had been diverted in time. One mistake had been caught before it turned into a fatal delay. No one clapped. No one cheered. There was no dramatic celebration. People simply exhaled. The senior pilot did not look at Mara. He stared at the map. The JTAC adjusted his headset and said quietly, "Good catch." He did not say it loudly. He did not announce it to the room. He said it to the space between himself and Mara. Mara nodded once. That was all. The tent slowly filled with motion again. Markers squeaked. Chairs shifted. People spoke. But something fundamental had changed. No one repeated her call sign. No one joked. No one smirked. A few pilots glanced toward her, then looked away. Not in embarrassment, not in respect, in reassessment. Like they were seeing a piece of equipment they had assumed was decorative suddenly perform a critical function. Mara returned to her notebook. Her pen moved. Her posture remained relaxed. Her face unchanged. She had not saved the patrol. Not alone. She had not flown a single pass. She had not fired a weapon. She had simply noticed something that others had missed. And in a place where seconds killed people, that was enough. From that moment on, people started watching her. Not openly, not obviously. But when she spoke, heads turned. When she wrote, eyes lingered. When she stood quietly in the corner, she was no longer invisible, still underestimated, still uncelebrated, but no longer dismissed. The laughter was gone. In its place was something far more dangerous. Expectation. The operations tent was quieter than it had been an hour earlier. Not calm, just controlled. The kind of quiet that followed near misses and close calls. People spoke in lower voices. Radios were adjusted more carefully. Markers moved slower across the board. Mara stood in her usual place near the edge. Notebook open. Pen resting lightly between her fingers. Near the entrance, the canvas flap lifted. A tall figure stepped inside, silhouetted briefly by the fading light. The visiting squadron commander. Most of the pilots straightened without thinking. The mission planner moved toward him, already beginning a low-voiced update. As the commander walked deeper into the tent, someone near the back made a quiet comment to a friend, trying to lighten the mood. Maybe we should let that call sign save the day again. A soft chuckle followed. Not loud, not cruel, almost nervous. The commander stopped. He did not turn sharply. He simply stopped walking. What call sign? He asked. The voice that had spoken hesitated. Hers, the pilot said, nodding toward Mara. The commander followed the gesture. His eyes landed on her. They did not slide past. They did not flick away. They stayed. Mara looked. No change in expression. No recognition. No expectation. The commander took a step closer. Whose call sign is that? He asked. Captain Cole, someone answered. The commander studied her face. Not her uniform. Not her patches. Her face. A long moment passed. Then he said quietly, I flew with her before. A few heads turned. The commander did not raise his voice. Did not look for reaction. He continued in the same steady tone. Different theater, high-threat airspace, bad weather, bad intel, worse nights. He glanced briefly toward the map. She brought 2 damaged aircraft home when neither should have made it back. No dramatic pause, no embellishment, just statements. She stayed on station when others had to pull off. Another short pause. Multiple emergency recoveries. The tent felt smaller. Not because anyone moved. Because no one did. The commander's eyes returned to Mara. She did not look away. She did not nod. She did not react at all. The commander gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Then he turned back toward the mission planner. Carry on, he said. The room did not resume immediately. No one spoke. No one laughed. No one filled the silence. It stretched heavy, thick, uncomfortable, not with embarrassment, not with awe, with the weight of sudden understanding. Mara stood exactly where she had been standing before. Same posture, same calm. But the story people had built about her in their heads had just collapsed, and no one knew what to replace it with. The radio cracked again before anyone had fully found their footing after the commander's words. Urgent this time, tighter contact continuing. Enemy shifting positions. We're pinned down. The JTUC leaned forward, eyes scanning his screen. Razer 2 is bingo fuel. They're coming off station. The words hung in the air. No other aircraft were airborne. The remaining jets on the line were cold. Crews were present. Pilots were present. But nothing was ready to launch in time if the patrol collapsed in the next few minutes. The commander looked at the board, then at the crews. Then his eyes moved to Mara. Not dramatically, not with ceremony, as if it were the most natural decision in the world. Can you take it? He asked. Mara did not look surprised. She did not straighten. She did not hesitate. Yes, sir. That was all. No speeches. No visible adrenaline. She turned and walked outside. The wind tore across the flight line, whipping dust around her legs. Ground crew were already moving. Someone ran to pull wheel chocks. Another reached for a ladder. Mara climbed into the cockpit with smooth economical motion. Harness clipped, straps tightened, canopy lowered. The world narrowed to instruments and procedure. The engine winded, then deepened, then roared. The aircraft came alive beneath her. Lights flickered. Displays stabilized. She taxied forward, nose light cutting a pale tunnel through dust and darkness. Inside the operations tent, headsets went back on. The JTA keyed his mic. Aircraft check in. Mara pressed her transmit switch. She gave her call sign. No one laughed. No one repeated it. No one commented at all. Copy you loud and clear. The JTA replied. Just business. Just trust. Mara climbed into the darkening sky. Cloud layers swallowed the horizon. Wind buffeted the aircraft. She adjusted, compensated. Her voice stayed level, confirming grid. Numbers were exchanged. She did not rush. She did not stall. She verified. Then she rolled in. Inside the tent, people leaned toward their screens. No one spoke. Mara's voice came through steady, in hot. The first run was clean. Short, burst controlled. Good effects, the JTAK said. Enemy fire shifted. Mara adjusted angle. Adjusted altitude. Came in again in hot. Another controlled pass. The patrol's voice broke through, breathless. Enemy breaking contact. We're moving. Mara did not celebrate. She did not change tone. She stayed overhead, orbited, watched. When small arms fire flared again from a treen, she responded immediately. No hesitation. No wasted words. Visual engaging. The fire stopped. Silence followed. Not radio silence, battle silence. The kind that told you something had ended. The patrol leader came back on the net. We're clear. Beginning extraction. Mara stayed on station until the last friendly element reported clear. Only then did she turn back toward base. Her landing was routine, textbook. No dramatic braking, no aggressive taxi. She rolled to a stop and shut down. The canopy lifted. Wind rushed in. Mara climbed down the ladder. Dust coated her boots. Her face looked the same as it had before she took off. Inside the tent, people watched her approach. No one clapped. No one shouted. No one rushed forward. A few pilots nodded, each small unspoken. The senior pilot who had dismissed her earlier stood near the doorway. He did not smile. He did not speak. He raised his hand and he saluted. Not sharp. Not theatrical, simple. Correct. Mara stopped, returned the salute, then walked past him. The jet sat cooling behind her, metal ticking softly in the night, and for the first time since she had arrived at the base, no one in that place doubted that her call sign belonged in the sky. The flight line settled back into its familiar rhythm. Engines cooled. Crew chiefs moved between aircraft with flashlights and quiet voices. The wind eased just enough to let dust fall back to the ground. Mara stood beside her jet with a rag in one hand and a small bottle of cleaner in the other. She wiped the canopy in slow circular motions. Not because it needed to be perfect, not because anyone was watching, because it was part of the job. Her helmet rested on the ground near the ladder. No one hovered. No one asked for a story. No one asked how it felt. Mara did not offer anything. Inside the tent, conversation slowly returned to normal volume. Not joking, not loud, just professional. The night had taken enough energy out of everyone that there was no appetite for drama. A junior pilot approached Mara hesitantly, stopping a few feet away like he was unsure if he was allowed to interrupt. Captain Cole, he said. Mara looked over. Thanks for earlier and for tonight. He did not try to make it poetic. He did not exaggerate. He just said it. Mara nodded once. Roger. The junior pilot stood there for a moment longer, then seemed to realize there was nothing else to say. He walked away. Mara went back to cleaning the canopy. She did not look around to see who might be watching. She did not check for salutes. She did not linger in the open. She finished the last section, capped the bottle, and set it inside the cockpit. Then she climbed down and picked up her helmet. That was it. No victory lap. No gathering, no speech. Because tomorrow, nothing extraordinary had happened. She had been asked to fly. She had flown. That was all. Courage in its purest form rarely makes noise. It does not ask to be noticed. It does not introduce itself. It does not demand belief. Real skill does not need to explain where it came from. It shows up, it performs. Then it disappears back into routine. Most of the people who carry the heaviest responsibility in war do not look like heroes. They look tired. They look quiet. They look ordinary until the moment arrives when ordinary is no longer enough. And in that moment, they become exactly what is needed. Some of the strongest voices in war speak only when it matters. Across every base, every ship, every outpost, there are men and women whose stories never make headlines. People who do their work quietly. People who carry years of experience without wearing it on their sleeves. People who have saved lives without ever telling anyone about it. They walk among others who do not know what they have endured. They listen to jokes that miss the truth. They accept being underestimated because they understand something deeper. That real worth is proven in action, not in volume, not in reputation. Stories like Mara's exist all around us, unseen, uncelebrated. Essential. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These stories keep the courage alive for generations to come.